Hey guys, welcome back into my studio and welcome into this first ever draw along series. This is the first video in an 8-part series where we're going to learn how to draw this cat. Each episode is probably going to be about an hour's long and it's all going to be filmed live, so you're going to be able to see all the different marks that I'm making it in real time. All the voiceover is going to be live as well, so you're going to be able to hear exactly what I'm thinking while I'm drawing this cat. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Hey guys, welcome into my studio. So like I said, what we're going to be doing today is a bit of a draw along session. So I've decided to film this entire one in real time, so you can see exactly what I'm doing and exactly how long it takes me to do it. Obviously it's going to be spread into quite a few videos, sort of roughly 45 minutes to an hour long each. And I'll talk you through a little bit of my setup. So I've got my board, so this is just a 5x7 ampersand scratch board. I've already drawn up my line art on here. I don't know if you can see that, but I will put a copy of my line art or a link to my line art in the description, so if you want to download that you can do, but most people I think will just want to draw up their line art themselves. The photo that we're going to do is a free one from Pixabay. All I've done is I've imported it onto my iPad, changed it into black and white, not really messed about with the contrast too much, but again I'll put a link to this one in the description, so that if you want to download it and follow along you can. I've got my microphone just in front of me, so hopefully you can hear me. Obviously because we're doing this live, I'd normally have chance to sort of edit what I say, if I get confused or sort of I misword what I'm meant to say. So I do apologise if some of the things that I say don't make sense, or I lose what I'm saying, lose track of what I'm saying, because I'm going to try and be concentrating on this but also talking you through what I'm doing at the same time. So without further ado, let's go ahead. So obviously I've got my reference photo on here. Main reason for this is so that I can zoom in, get all the detail, and sort of zoom out and make it as big or as small as I want to. So you can sort of see what I'm doing when I'm zooming it in, what I'm looking for, and bits like that. Obviously when I first started drawing, as I've said in quite a few of my videos in the past, I start by thinking about where I'm going to begin. Normally I begin with the eyes. On this one especially, it's sort of right in the centre, it's the focal point of what we're going to be drawing, or I start with something like the brightest area, or at least pick out the brightest area to so that I know that's the area that I can't go any brighter with, and that's going to be sort of the top level of brightness that I'm going to be able to achieve. So on this one, it's going to be sort of the fur that you've got coming around the top of this eye, on just this edge of the bridge of the nose, and also down here on this the bit of the muzzle that you can't really see. Everything else is sort of not quite as bright as those areas, but we may boost the contrast, boost the brightness up as we go through. So I think, to be honest, on this one I'm probably going to start with the eye. Fingers crossed. So we'll zoom in, and I'm starting to think, well, what texture am I going to use for this eye? So you can see quite clearly the striations. It's got quite a bit of detail in this eye. I've got a nice big eye to nice big area to sort of work with. It's not going to be too small for us. Now I have plotted out some of my lines, just so that I can follow where these striations are going. Now like I said, this isn't going to be necessarily perfect. There are going to be elements that you're not happy with, or you've changed, or you can't get just right. So it is just about getting a general feel of this eye. Now I could have gone in and started with stippling, and to be honest I might do a little bit of stippling later on, just to add some of those dots, but to be honest, you can see quite a lot of striations, so it might work better just whilst we're doing that. So if you haven't already seen the video on where I sort of break down a reference photo and decide how I'm going to tackle certain areas, I'll leave a link up in the top corner, and I'll also put a link down in the description for you, So if you want to go and view that, see how I've broken down a reference photo in the past. So it's not going to be this one, it's going to be the tiger one that I've just done. But it'll give you a general idea on what I'm looking for when I'm looking at my reference photos. So the needle that I'm using at the minute, this is the round liner needle, and I think it's a 7 round liner, which basically just means that there's 7 needles in this sort of cluster here. Now when I first started drawing, it does take me a little bit of time just to get into it, just to feel my way around, just to know what's going to work and what's not going to work. So this area and this sort of part of the drawing, it always takes the longest. I'm making sure I press really, really light with this one. So right now I don't want to be putting some really sort of definitive bright marks down, just because if they're going wrong, or it's going in the wrong direction, I want to be able to at least have the opportunity to cover it up or change it. And to be honest, out of this whole drawing, this eye is probably going to be the hardest part. The fur, it looks complex to begin with, but once it's broken down, it's not too difficult. So that's why I sort of chose this reference photo. Plus it's lovely and clear. You've got some really good sort of dark black areas where we can get some really good contrast. So like I say, all I'm doing at the minute, I don't know if you can see it on camera, it might not, because I'm going quite light, it may or may not be picked up. But I'll zoom it in for you just so you can see. So I'm just plotting out where I'm going to put these striations. And when I rotate my board, I tend to rotate my reference photo as well. Just because that way it's a little bit easier to work from. I'm not sort of cricking my neck trying to turn my reference photo as well. So that's why I find working on the iPads quite good, to be honest. Now something to notice about this eye, as you can see in the top corner just up here and sort of just down here, it fades into the blackness. So you are making sure that you don't go too bright right up to that line, because instead of getting this nice soft edge that you've got around the sort of top area of this eye, you're going to get quite a stark, harsh edge if you go too brightly right up to that line. And if you need to, at the end you can, or once you finish the eye, and we might even have to, I'm not sure yet, but we may have to go in with some India ink just to blend it out even more, because there's only going to be such a level of brightness that you can achieve with light pressure. Other times you are going to have to darken things up with the use of India ink or Faber-Castell pen, Pit Artist pen, or some sort of ink pen. Like I say, I'm just taking my time at the minute. There's no rush. There's no need to rush through a picture like this, especially when you're doing an area that's going to be the sort of focal point of the whole piece. Sometimes I don't start with the eye, I may start with a different area for a specific reason. Sometimes if an eye's incredibly complex, I'll either want to start it and get it in early in the drawing, just so I know it's complete and that I don't have to worry about it, or I might, I may even decide to leave it till later on, just until I've sort of worked my way into the drawing and I'm comfortable and like warmed up and things like that. So I've marked out as well where this pupil's going to be, just because again, if you get that pupil in the wrong place, you may make your cat or whatever animal you're drawing look a little bit cross-eyed. So obviously I've got my highlight area that's going to be just up there. I'm just slowly working my way towards that, trying to figure out which way these marks are going. And it is going to be this, this eye is going to be a little bit more difficult than some other eyes, just because of they've got quite a lot of detail and it's quite a big eye on the actual board. Like I say, I turn my reference photo just so that it matches up with what I'm drawing. I end up turning my reference photo quite often on a piece like this, especially when I'm working on an area that's circular. Now you'll probably notice I always sort of pull my tattoo needle towards me like this. I never, well, I say never, there are occasions where I need to, but rarely do I sort of push away. I always end up just pulling it back towards me, just because that's what feels natural. I find sometimes when I'm pushing away, the tattoo needle catches. If you want a more in-depth tutorial as well on how to do an eye, I do have a video over on my YouTube channel. It's sort of not quite a draw along because it's sped up, but it's a tutorial on how to draw a leopard's eye and all the fur sort of structure surrounding the eye. So that's quite a good one to watch, just because it's a similar sort of eye with the striations, and it's a cat's eye as well, one of the big cats. So if you haven't already, might be a good idea to have a watch of that one. I'll put a link to it again in the description and a card up in the corner for you guys. So when I'm rubbing my finger over it just like that, all I'm doing is that there's sort of excess dust on the board, just from where I've been scratching, and all it does is push that bit of dust back in and sort of darken up the marks. So if I've gone a little bit too bright with one of my marks, it allows me to sort of redarken that up. And if I said too dark, then I mean too sort of light with my marks. It allows me to sort of make them a little bit darker. All I'm doing now is just re-going over some of those lines, some of them striations, making them a little bit brighter, just making them stand out a little bit more. But obviously now at the minute we're working on this part of the eye just down here. So this bit is a little bit brighter than the other parts of the eye. And I've already sort of marked out where those points sort of start and end. So all I'm doing is just trying to make sure that I get in the right place with them. And obviously as you look, there's not an awful lot of detail in that area. So again, I'm just trying to mimic that just by keeping my strokes really close together. Just sort of trying to make it a little bit more blurred out. And again, trying to make sure that I don't go outside of the line of where the eye is, just because I don't want to change the shape of the eye by accident. And again, trying to keep my strokes really quite light. Again, just in case we make a mistake, or we need to change something. We don't want the lines to be too bright. So I find these round liner tattoo needles really good for something like this, just because if you get your marks quite close together, it does make it look, it sort of helps you cover up quite a bit of area without leaving some obvious line strokes there. And it's a little bit easier to control, I think, than, let's say, a fiberglass brush. And it's probably what I'm going to use when I come over onto this part of the eye that's sort of a little bit more blurred out. Now, as you can see at the minute, we've got quite a stark edge to this eye, sort of where I've gone a little bit brighter. So at the minute now, what I'm going to do is sort of try and blend that into the rest of the eye and sort of lighten up the other areas of the eye to sort of match it. So I hope you can see what I'm doing. Like I said, I don't know if the footage is picking it up because all I'm looking at is the back of the GoPro camera. So after this session, after this first session, I'll review the footage, make sure you guys can see it, and then if need be, I'll change the setup. Or if there's anything else you want me to do, let me know in the comments. So I'm leaving the highlight out just for the moment, sort of the main highlight, the reflection in the eye, just because I want to get these striations in, and I want the rest of the eye to look good before I put that in, because that's the part that's going to make the eye really come together and really look realistic and sort of have more life to it. And the thing is, no one's really going to see your reference photo apart from you. Unless you're doing a pet portrait where you need to get things exactly spot on. But generally, if you're doing, let's say, a wildlife picture, if you're doing a wild cat, then the eyes are going to be slightly different. The fur is going to be ever so slightly different. If the wind or the lighting was ever so slightly changed on a given day, then that all of that's going to change the look of your image. So you don't have to get things exactly spot on. Obviously close is going to be what looks best, but don't sort of panic yourself if you get an area that's slightly too bright, or the fur in slightly the wrong direction, wrong place, or things like that, because it's not the end of the world. At the end of the day, no one's really probably going to notice apart from you. I know we're all our own worst critics, so I think it probably affects us more than or we notice it more than what anyone else truly would. Okay, so now I'm just going to go in and sort of get these slightly lighter areas just with my 1 RL tattoo needle, so my 1 round liner, and all that means is that there's 1 needle on the end of it instead of, let's say, 7 that were on that one. I do have a hand poke tool as well, which is what I use to sort of hold my tattoo needles when I'm drawing. However, I've only got one of them, I broke my other one, so that's actually got a different tattoo needle in it at the minute, which I'll be using when it comes to the fur. Now I'm just smoothing out that highlight just because it looked a little bit patchy in places. So just lightly going over it again. Trying to get it all sort of like an even tone. Just because as you look on it, there's not an awful lot of variation in the tones in that, just that lower highlight. And I have made mine a little bit brighter just because the one in the reference photo feels like a little bit dark for a highlight, so I like the eyes have a little bit more life. So I have lightened that up just a little bit. And you're free to do that. It is, at the end of the day, your own, like your reference photo, it's your piece of art. If you want to make yours a little bit brighter, then go ahead. That's what I've done. Or if you want to stick to exactly what the reference photo is, then again, that's absolutely fine. So I've left this little area out. So just this, I don't know if you can quite see that. You may have to have a look on your own reference photo. But just on this edge of the eye, the strokes tend to angle slightly more downwards just to give a little bit of a curve to the eye. So again, that's all we're going to do. Nice and lightly. Just angle it down. I'm just rubbing my finger over just to re-darken everything up slightly and push that ink dust back in. I don't know if that's the right word for it, ink dust, but that's what I'm going to call it. So I'm going to try and make these tutorials, these sort of walkthroughs, as beginner friendly as I can. I tried to pick an image that I feel isn't too complicated, that most people might be able to do, and then hopefully if you want to just follow along, depending on whatever skill level you are, you can. So I won't be going as sort of hyper realistic as what maybe I normally would, just because I want to keep it nice and simple for you guys. So all I did there was just blend out that highlight just a little bit more. I'll show you that's what we're sort of looking at the minute. So now we're going to sort of try and tackle this white highlight. It's just thinking about how we're going to do that, whether we're going to just keep with the same technique as we had down here. And to be honest, I think that's probably going to be best. Maybe some hatching or just cross hatching sort of style, and hopefully this will just give that extra bit of life. Zoom out a little bit so you can see what we're doing. I'm just plotting in where things are going to go. So if this doesn't work, if this doesn't, give me the level of brightness that I want, I'll just change up to one of my slice tools with a better blade on it, and going with that, and that should give me the right amount of highlight. The thing is, I don't want to go too bright. I don't really want it to be the sort of colour of the board, just because that might stand out too much then. No, I said I wanted to lighten it up and make it even brighter than what's on the reference photo, but I don't want to go overboard with it. So we'll merge that highlight in just a moment. Yeah, so I think I'll stay with the tattoo needle for this one, just because it's given me a good amount of highlight. So I'm quite happy with that. I don't want it to go, like I say, too much brighter. Just a little bit. I want to make sure as well, especially at the bottom, I don't leave a ring of the blackboard around it, just because that will give a sort of cartoony look to the eye. If you leave like a harsh black line or anything like that around something that you draw in, like a highlight or an eye or something, and it can lead it to look a little bit cartoony. So what I need to do is just slowly bring it across and merge it in, being careful not to make the rest of the eye too bright. We'll do the same on the other side. And as we work towards the top of this eye, it's going to get more faded anyway, just because we're starting to sort of disappear into that shadowed area. ever so light with this area, barely touching the board with my tattoo needle. Again, like I say, if you end up leaving a sort of harsher line on this area, that's what's going to sort of take away from the realism. So just slowly, if it takes 3 or 4 passes, but you do it slowly, that's going to be better than, going in with 1 pass and making it too bright. And if you need to, like I say, just put your finger over it, knock it back a shade or 2. Then we're going to do the same on the other side, just sort of feathering it up. Like I said, I don't want to go too bright, so at times I may just have to rub my finger over. And I may even come back in with some, like I say, some India ink. Knock it back even further. So these lines here I just feel are a little bit too bright, so I'm just going in with my black Faber-Castell Pit Artist pen, I don't know if you can see that, and just redarken up some of the areas. It's sort of like a quick fix rather than mixing up a new batch of India ink to sort of put in. So I'd only gone one way with my lines when I was doing the highlight. If you want that highlight to be even brighter, so I'll sort of show you up at the board, if you want that to be even brighter, just go back across it in the opposite direction. So if you've come, I think I came this way, so then I'd cross it over the other way if I wanted that just to stand out even more. But I'm quite happy with the level of brightness that I've got in that. I don't really think it needs to go too much brighter. But as I get more things in, I'll sort of revisit the eye maybe and add areas that I think, might need doing. I might put a little bit more detail in the eye, or, make it a little bit brighter depending on what I want it to look like in the end. So now I'm just sort of seeing if I'm happy with what I've done with the eye so far. Do I want to add any more detail? So like I said, I don't want to go overboard because I want this video to be beginner friendly. So I want, someone that's, not got a lot of experience in scratchboard, just to be able to pick up a board and follow along with this in real time and have something looking good at the end of it. But go putting, crazy amounts of detail in, it's gonna maybe be a little bit overwhelming. So I think for the time being we'll leave the eye, the actual eye, the iris, just as it is, and we might just start working a little bit on the fur coming around the bottom of the eye, because that's a nice sort of level of fur that we've got there. So I tend to turn my board, like I say, to the direction that I'm working in. I'm going to go this way, and I've already plotted out sort of where these fur strokes are going to go. So if you do end up, using my line art, you'll be able to see sort of the outline of the eye and where this fur comes to. So all I'm going to do, zoom out so I can see what I'm doing, is sort of follow along with that. Like I say, it doesn't have to be exact, and I'm just putting a few little strokes down just with my single round liner tattoo needle. So my one that's just got one blade, one needle into it. And the lines on this line art may, appear a little bit overwhelming, but they've all got a bit of a purpose. They sort of show me the direction in which the fur's going, so that I don't get too confused. Luckily we've got quite a lot of detail for this guy's fur. So the way I do fur, it sort of always starts off the same, so I'll try it and get a light layer down of what I call the under fur. So this is the fur that you can see sort of through the highlighted fur, and this acts as sort of a map for me, so I know where my borders are for that area, the direction that fur is going in, and it just makes it easy then when you come on to the later stages. So at the minute all I'm doing is just plotting in a little bit of texture, nothing too crazy. And like I said, this could be any cat, so if you get a fur stroke in, slightly the wrong place, honestly, don't worry about it. It's not the end of the world. You can either cover it up or, just say it was in the reference photo. It's sort of my go-to line when someone says something looks funny. I'm like, it's just in the reference photo. So I'm starting to think of, what techniques am I going to use on this guy's fur, what needles am I going to use, what tools am I going to use. So it's quite textured looking fur that he's got. I say he, it could be a she. So is tattoo needles going to be the best? If so, what tattoo needles? So I've been using recently a Magnum style tattoo needle, which is basically, I'll show you it. It's the one that's in the holder. The amount of work that I've done with these, I probably should get another one. So basically it's a 5 Magnum weaved. So weaved just means that they're staggered, so that there's one row there and then another row underneath. And because it's 5, there's 5 needles in total, so I've got 3 on top, 1 top and 2 on the bottom. And because they are weaved, it just gives me a more, I'd say a more natural sort of flow, because the lines, you can't quite predict where they're going to go. And that randomness just makes fur look even more realistic. You don't want to be putting fur down that's, I say, like straight like soldiers, so just in lines. You do want them to curve and overlap. And it's the mistakes and the imperfections sometimes that make things look even more realistic. So as you can see, I'm just getting those basic fur strokes in to begin with. Still, like I say, nothing at all complex here. We're just following along with the reference photo, putting lines where there's lines on the reference photo. I'm just being careful as we're coming up to the eye, because we do have a very small sort of eyelid showing, and that, to be honest, I probably should have put in whilst I did the eye, but now we're on the fur, I've sort of just forgotten about it. So I'm leaving space so that I can put that in just a minute. So I'm not butting these fur strokes right up to the edge of the eye. But all this is still just the under fur. None of this is, necessarily the fur that's going to be showing. that's going to be on show all the time. We're just getting things going in the right direction and getting things started. As you can tell, so we've sort of come out this way, come a little bit underneath this eye, and now all we're doing is we're going to just curve around for this area over here. So this is what I mean when I say, you know, pay attention to your reference photo. Have a look at the fur, use landmarks, you know, other aspects in the drawing to plan where things are going to start curving around and where things are sort of changing direction. And the strokes that you're putting in should be, you know, similar length to what you can actually see on your board, on your reference photo, sorry. So, you know, putting really really long fur strokes, let's say on the nose, you know, it's obviously going to look a little bit off because, you know, they shouldn't be there. That's not the type of fur that's there. So try and get roughly the right length of fur in the places that you're doing it. So here we've got pretty much quite short fur throughout the majority of this. So it's quite easy to follow along with. It's a little bit shorter, like I say, when you come up onto the nose and just round here. And it's the curving of these fur strokes and, you know, the changing of the direction of the fur that's going to make it look, you know, realistic and like an actual cat. So I'm going to start bringing this fur now closer to the eye. And then what I'll probably end up doing is getting that lower eyelid in. There's not much detail on this eyelid. It's quite a small area as well. So I'll probably, like you see me do, I'll probably just use stippling. It's a technique that I prefer to use for, you know, a lot of things like this. Bits of skin showing, the nook of the eye, normally the highlights to be honest, but just because I feel like I can get into quite a small space and be quite precise. With where I'm putting stuff. I'm just going to switch over onto my slice blade with the X-Acto knife just to boost up the highlight on this under section. And to be honest, just to make it go a little bit quicker. So on the reference photo, if you zoom in, you can see it's quite a similar tone, but I do just want mine to stand out a little bit more. we're doing, again, similar thing to when we were actually working on the eye. We're just slowly building up that texture. No need to go too quickly. Sort of just testing what it looks like if you put lines in instead of stippling. Now that highlight right on the end of there, that's slightly too bright. So I'm just, like I say, just going to come in and just dab a little bit of ink on. Just knock that brightness back. Just because I don't want your eye to be drawn to that specific section if, you know, when it's not meant to be. So for this part of the stippling, I'm actually using the round liner needle with 7 needles in it, just because it gives you a thicker type of stippling. It puts, you know, as you can imagine, 7 dots down instead of just the 1, and it keeps it nice and subtle. It doesn't, you know, go too bright too quickly, which is, you know, something that I'm always looking for. I'd rather build up tones than go straight in and have them be there just in case I need to change it for whatever reason. It'll probably end up coming back to this part later in the drawing. You know, I get areas up to a nice level. I don't sort of work over the whole board at the same time, but I will sort of keep bobbing back in and going into different areas. So when, sort of like when I'm working up here, something may catch my eye and I may go back and rework something. So it's never completely finished, but I like to get it up to a good standard before moving on. So now all we're going to do is get sort of the brightness of this fur in. I like to get something sort of that bright in quite quickly on in the drawing quite early on, just because it then gives me something to work off. I know sort of then, you know, does anything else need to be brightened up, because that's one of the brightest areas in the drawing. So I'm using my slice tool with the X-Acto knife on it, the X-Acto blade, sorry, number 11. Same thing, but just slices version. So this is ceramic, not steel, so it lasts quite a long time. I've been using this one pretty much since I got it. It's been probably about 4 or 5 different pieces now, and it's still, as you can see, it's still working. I've not had to change it. It's getting to the point now really where I do probably need to pop a new one in, but at the minute it's keeping my highlights not as bright as they could do, but that's a good thing, because I'd rather then go over with a couple of layers. So even when I do change it, I probably won't get rid of the blade. I'll probably just keep it as like a spare, just in case I need to have a highlight that's not stark white. gives you a little bit more freedom to play around with the pressure that you're putting down. So obviously this will eventually blend into the area underneath, but I'm just sort of getting these top highlights in first. This is the part that tends to go a bit quicker as well. Like I said, each individual hair doesn't need to be perfect, doesn't need to be in the exact right location. Just a general feel I find works pretty well. It's more I feel about the tones and the sort of level of contrast you've got in your piece, rather than whether it's exactly the right hair in the exact right location. I find randomness helps, to be honest. You know, the random hairs that you've got flying away, if you have them, it makes your piece look even more realistic. Sometimes I'll even add in hairs that aren't meant to be there, just to make it a little bit more random. So obviously I haven't put sort of the hair that's sort of going down this area just yet. This is just sort of like this obvious bit underneath the eye that I'm working on. Like I say, I'm constantly rotating my board just to get myself in a better position to put these first strokes in. These areas, they may not be even as bright as I'm going to get them, and maybe put them, you know, even brighter as we work into the drawing, and I get a few more of the tones in there. But for now, I'm quite happy with it. So we've got the eye in, and we've got just this little bit of fur to start us off. So I'll show you what mine looks like. So when it's further away, the tones get a little bit blurred out. So that's sort of where we're at the minute, and I think that's a good place to stop for now. We've got a little bit done in sort of this first hour. Like I say, each one of these videos is probably going to be about 45 minutes to an hour long, I know that is quite long, but unfortunately, there'll be about 25 videos if they were 30 minutes long or 20 minutes long, so they are going to have to be a little bit longer than normal, but hopefully that way you get to see the whole drawing sort of from start to finish and exactly how I do each individual aspect and what's going through my head when I'm having to think about it. So I hope you've enjoyed this first video, and I'll see you all again in the next one.